Hello, everybody, and welcome to the CSDA's webinar series. The title of the webinar presentation today is the Sport Tourism Assessment Template. My intro, I'm Stephen Trainer on behalf of the CSDA, the Canadian Sport Tourism Alliance. I'm happy to see all of you here today online. I'll be overseeing technology, taking your questions, and supporting the presenter today. So I'm really excited about our speaker today. He's Grant MacDonald. He's president of GM Event Inc., past chair of the Canadian Sport Tourism Alliance, and author of our new and exciting stat template tool, as well as our sport tourism planning template 2.0. The webinar today is going to schedule to last between 45 minutes to 1 hour. Grant will make his presentation, and there will be an opportunity throughout his presentation for question and answer. There will also be a final opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the webinar. But before we get started, let's go through a few technology items. So if you're hearing me right now, you can see that there's a dashboard on the top right of your screen that can help you navigate throughout the webinar. On the audio side, I want to make sure that everyone is using the audio feature properly. So if you've dialed in on your phone, please ensure that you've entered the audio PIN number. And note that all attendees are muted due to the number of people on the line and to reduce distractions for all. So if you try to speak up right now and get my attention, no one will be able to hear you. So if you are using the microphone for audio, and it's not working, you're having some difficulty, I suggest that you resolve it by switching over to the telephone audio option. Just to test our audio capability here, for all of you that are attending, could you please raise your hand? There's a raise hand button there. Could you raise it right now for me? Okay. So we've got some people raising their hands there. Great. And if you've got questions, I ask that you simply type your question in the chat box or the question box near the bottom of your dashboard, and I will let the presenters know when we have a question, when there's appropriate time to pause. So please, we've got lots of time today. Please ask your questions, and I'll be happy to ask them to Grant, and we'll get those passed on. If you have technology related questions or issues, please do bring those forward through the same question box or chat box so we can try to address them right away. I'll be watching out for them and ensure you get the full experience for the webinar. So on the handout side, you'll notice that on your menu, there's something called handouts. A PDF version of the presentation is provided to you. Feel free to download it before you leave the webinar. The presenter will be running through each of these slides, so please follow along on your screen. Just know that you have that as a reference for you if you have any issues. So let us get started. I am going to pass it off to Grant right now. Grant?
Thank you, Stephen, and it's good to be with everybody today, and thank you for taking time out of your schedules to participate in our review of the Sport Tourism Assessment Template, or STAT. To kick things off, we are going to do a poll question, and that poll question, Stephen, if you want to introduce that and get everybody to submit their votes.
Sure. So the question is how many of you have an existing or current sport tourism or event attraction hosting strategy? Yes, you have one. No, you don't, or you are unsure. We're at now at about 78% of the vote has come in thus far. And it's a little bit surprising, some of the answers here. For those of you with the poll in front of you, please get those answers in, see where we're at. I'm going to close the poll here, but what we're looking at is about 71% of you said no, you don't have an existing current sport tourism event attraction or hosting strategy. 29 saying yes. Back over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. So we can learn a little bit from that, and the fact that you don't have a sport event attraction and hosting strategy is not a surprise. And for many that do, what we would like to do is to find out if it's serving its purpose and it's delivering on the opportunity to have continual improvement in your sport hosting program. So what is STAT? STAT was developed as an outgrowth of the sport tourism planning template, which was the initial template developed by CSTA back in the early 2000s. And the sport tourism planning template was meant to guide host cities and regions through the development of their specific sport tourism strategy or hosting strategy. What we have found is that many jurisdictions, because sport tourism is often an industry segment that exists within a destination marketing organization, within an economic development organization, or within a municipal staff structure, it often serves dual purposes and sometimes isn't implemented to its full capacity. So like it would be if you've got a high performance car and you drive it in the slow lane, you're certainly not going to be able to get as much out of it as you can. So we had identified that there's an opportunity for communities of all sizes, budgets, and experience levels to assess what their current state is as it relates to sport attraction, sport event attraction, and hosting. It can help to improve your in-house process and marketing. And really, for those of you that are working on the front lines as staff people, trying to inform the decisions of your councils or of your organizations and trying to help to ensure that all of the critical information gets into the mix before decisions are made, this can give you some good ammunition that can help you to both educate as well as inform those decision makers within your city. How it works is that it is available to all members of the CSTA. Similar to the Sport Tourism Economic Assessment Model, or STEAM, there is a free version which CSTA offers to all of its members free of charge in the member only access area of the CSTA website. And it can provide you with a snapshot that can enable you to get started on the path towards the development of a sport tourism strategy. Think of it as step 0 in the development of your strategy, because it will help you to assess where you are before jumping into the deep end of the pool in the development of a sport tourism strategy. It is online based, and it is a worksheet that generally takes between 10 and 15 minutes to complete. You receive scores in 9 key areas, as well as a cumulative score. So when you submit the online survey, what we do is we compile all of your data, we send you back a worksheet, and then we can provide you with some information and some learnings based on the information or inputs that you've provided. How can it help you? It does give you that current state assessment so that you can understand and you can articulate to others who are helping to make decisions about the future of sport and event hosting in your jurisdictions with much needed data that is consistent and is something that will become industry standard. Over time, we'll be able to, as we compile more data, we'll be able to give you some comparison about your current state versus some similar sized markets, as well as the mean and median for the industry in Canada. It can give you an evaluation of your sport tourism program. So your first stat that you undertake, think of that as baseline. And then as you evolve your sport tourism program or event hosting program, it can show how you're progressing from year to year, over 3-year increments, 5-year, 10-year, and it can really help to show the evolution of how you've been able to put in some of these essential building blocks in order to ensure that you're a high-performing sport attraction and host destination. It can help to define some of the strategic directions, some areas that you may want to identify or target and they may be over longer terms. So they may be 3 or 5 year outcomes that you're identifying as a result of the completion of STAT. But it can also help to identify some of those tactical areas that you may be able to address in your business planning for next year. So it can be a tool that you can use on an annual basis, but it also can give you that strategic snapshot of where you are today. Now, probably the most important area that came out of the development of STAT, and I should say that that I had collaborated with Eric Savard, who is the director of knowledge capacity for CSTA, is we wanted to identify not just a single cycle that showed sport tourism, but you'll notice that there are two cycles within this infinity wheel that highlight both the bidding side and the hosting side. For some organizations, they are sales-based organizations, and they're about generating results and ensuring that they're developing new business. But what we wanted to do is we also wanted to capture the importance of hosting in this roadmap, because through the successful staging or hosting of events, that is going to build on your sport hosting resume and will ensure that you're able to bid with confidence for that next event. Ultimately, your reputation doesn't end once you've won the bid. That's where it's important to transition to the hosting part of the roadmap and ensure that you can successfully execute based on the promises that you've made in that bid process. I will mention in step 1 of this roadmap, event hosting structure and resources. In the overall score, STAT is based on 100 points, and 40% of those points are in step 1. Event hosting structure and resources is where most jurisdictions have the greatest opportunity to move the needle. And what we really wanted to emphasize in this was that the foundation for your sport tourism program needs to be able to support the weight of the rest of the program. So steps 2 through 10 will not be effective, will not be repeatable, will not be consistent if step 1 is not a solid foundation. So in step 1, within event hosting structure and resources, there are 4 areas. There are sport tourism structure and human resources, and that talks about the staffing, the governance, whether it is a shared resource or whether it is a dedicated resource, and really just how you're able to be able to mobilize the human resources required to not only identify opportunities, but turn those into winnable bids and then transition those into host organizations. Step 1 also talks about your existing assets. This is things like air, rail, and road access, your hotel and accommodations inventory. What are all of those other ancillary rooms and venues that you might need, whether they be meeting facilities, whether they be for social functions, or whether they be outside of the field of play. We also want to capture and want you to capture what your event readiness is related to the venues that you currently have. So we want to certainly identify all of those fields of play that you have, and all of those support venues that go along with them. As well, we want you to be able to capture some of the historical data and really identify some of the gaps that may exist within your community. For many of us, we may not have a full suite of event-ready venues at our disposal. And being able to identify those gaps is important and can help you in informing some of the municipal decision makers, as well as provincial decision makers that might be looking at longer term or master planning for facility development. And if you have a particular need, then you want to identify that so that it is able to be integrated or aligned with your recreation facility master planning. Also, very critical at this stage within your existing assets is the hosting capacity of the sport organizations within your community. You need to be able to assess that in an objective way so that if you need to develop certain volunteer capacity or hosting capacity within your jurisdiction, then you need to be able to identify where those gaps that are and how you might be able to address those to ensure that they can be turned into advantages for your bids and for hosting. Next, within step one, is the financial model for bidding and hosting. For many communities, and this is really was the catalyst for the development of STAT, was most communities are making significant financial decisions with not enough information, too little time, and creating a whole lot of pressure, which can lead to emotional decision making. What we wanted to do is to identify what the current state is for your municipality, whether or not you have access to any destination marketing fund dollars in order to develop new business, but then also for most jurisdictions, the financial guarantee is a significant obstacle to bidding for events. And that's something that every jurisdiction needs to be able to identify what their readiness is to assume any financial risk or how they can address that risk being mitigated within that community. In order to meet the needs of many rights holders, they will require some degree of certainty when it comes to the financial model. And then lastly, in step one, is marketing. How is your jurisdiction capitalizing on the opportunity that sport tourism or event hosting represents for your destination? Do you have standalone web pages? Do you have a clear call to action for your sport product? Is that clearly articulated, or is that embedded within your destination marketing organization or your economic development organization or your municipal corporation? What are your social media channels? How do you tell your story in a meaningful way, not just to your primary customer, who is the rights holder, but also to your secondary customers, all of those potential visitors that are making buying decisions about what destinations they plan to attend and what they hope to experience while they're there. So all of those things and all of that toolkit that you have to market your jurisdiction as an event host, but also as a tourism destination, are all critical and make up that 40% or foundational level. Before we go any further, I would like to open it up to any questions. We're still only at step one, but I promise you the rest of the steps will go much quicker.
Okay, I think it's great here. I have one question for you, Grant, and it's come from the participants. I guess they would like to ask, based on your experience, does having this sort of consistent, repeatable process at step one help you to inform your organization, municipal council, and your stakeholders? And can you give an experience personally of what it's like when you have a repeatable and consistent process, and as opposed to when things are a little bit more helter-skelter?
Well, from experience, I would say that if you don't have a repeatable and consistent process, it is going to make it a reactive process, so that you are trying to go from a standing start. You're going to have to generate an awful lot of information to inform a lot of decision makers to be able to make a decision without all of the required data. So if you do have this repeatable, consistent process, all of these things are already in place. You're not having to spend time to build some of those marketing pieces or to ensure that you've got the appropriate human resources to support the development of bids or to transition from those bids to hosts. And you're able to have your story already packaged, and you know what the rules are by which decisions are made. In cases where that is not clear or that foundation is not in place, then it creates a lot more anxiety amongst those decision makers, and it creates a lot more risk for you because ultimately you're having to use the goodwill that you've established through personal relationships to try to get on an agenda in a short time period and to be able to inform a decision that is oftentimes very public and creates a lot of angst amongst politicians and can create a lot of emotion within the media in your market and can also lead to tilling the soil for an opposition group to pop up and to say that this is not the right event, we're not the right host destination, and it can create a lot of conflict and competing messages in the local market.
Okay, so what you're saying is that having that sort of structure in place helps lead to buy-in from people, whether or not you have a clear relationship with them, because council leaders come and go, people in positions come and go, but having sort of that organized structure for event hosting kind of helps the rocky road and kind of smooth things out on a year-to-year or a bid-to-bid basis.
Yes, it's much more efficient time-wise, much more efficient on financial resources, and you're able to focus on the business case as opposed to some of the emotional arguments that may come with some events.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank Barb for that question, and I encourage the rest of the participants, if you have some of your stories that you want to share as well, or if you have any questions as Grant goes through, please send the question through the question box, and I'd be happy to ask on your behalf.
And I can say from experience that I once bid on an event where we didn't have the appropriate venue for that event, and we were trying to do in parallel a venue development exercise while we were trying to build a bid. Ultimately, that bid failed, not because it was the wrong bid, but ultimately we ran out of time because we couldn't get all of that activity into the required timetable for the bid. So step 2, researching and prospecting. What we've identified in this area is if you have a sport tourism strategy, of which 71% of you do, if you have an event attraction strategy, sometimes those may differ, but event attraction is really about identifying those particular sports or those particular events within your sport tourism strategy. So it's another level down. We've also addressed, as I mentioned earlier, the connection between your sport event and recreational facility master planning. And then if the number of bid prospect events that are directly related to your event attraction strategy. So if you identify events in a particular sport, are you going after events in that sport, or are you just throwing things at the wall and seeing what might stick? So that's step 2. Step 3 is bid assessment. This is where you start to inform the decisions by which you will bid for events and to ensure that those events are delivering the right impacts. So are you building out the business plan? Are you using decision support tools to inform those decisions, such as STEAM, which can provide you that forecast for economic impact? Are you developing those budgets in a consistent way? And are you identifying the opportunities for events to add to the development or capital improvement of some of your facilities? Step 4 is partnerships. And this is ensuring that you've got those partnerships in place with other levels of government, with other community organizations, with your accommodations partners, with your airport authority, with all of those groups that make up the success of each event. Are those partnerships already in place and embedded and baked in? If they are, then that again creates an opportunity for efficiency, and then it's a matter of informing and bringing them along as opposed to re-educating them every time that you come up with a bid target. Ultimately, you want to make sure that every business in your community is a potential ambassador, and you want to ensure that all of that is in place so that you can mobilize it when necessary. Step 5 is bid. So this is where you're coordinating and developing your bid book. You are putting together all of those elements that will be presented as part of your bid package, including the presentation, as well as any videos or other collateral that might be able to tell your story. You want to make sure that those are brand consistent, and you want to also ensure that you've got as much of that in the can as you can, so that when it comes time for a particular event, then it's a matter of reworking some existing content as opposed to trying to shoot it, produce it, and create it. After step 5, that's when hopefully you've got that big celebration where you congratulate each other, you say what a great job we did, and then that's also the holy crap moment when you go, oh my God, what have we done? That is why step 6, the transition to host, is so important. How you go from bid group to host group is going to be essential to the success of that event. You need to be able to ensure that you've got the means to transfer any knowledge that might need to go from the bid group to the organizing group. And you also need to make sure that you've got a good library of reference material from other events that have been hosted in your region, so that you can learn from each event that has been hosted, what has been successful, what hasn't, and be able to share that with the incoming organizing committee. Step 7 is event planning. This is where your organization may be an advisor to the organizing committee, and that there may be a formal role for the sport tourism organization to participate in that. Do you have a volunteer strategy and program within your market that shares information about volunteers with their approval, of course, to meet all regulatory and legislative requirements? But you want to make sure that you're able to capitalize on that knowledge capacity that exists within the volunteer sector from event to event. So it's not just sport specific volunteers, because many people will volunteer across sports if they have a good experience. Step 8 is event delivery and activation. And this is really about ensuring the success of the event. You want to support attendance building in the local market. You want to ensure that sponsorship connections are made. And you want to also ensure that visitor packaging is available. People can't make the buying decision to travel to your destination if they don't know what you have to offer. So being clear about your experiences, how residents can be engaged, and really having some budget to be able to activate on the event. Like most sponsorships, you need to be able to have some ammunition in reserve once the event is hosted, so that you can leverage that event to hopefully generate more interest. So you want to be able to activate around it. You also want to identify proactively the opportunity to engage the business community and economic development, because they're always looking for ways to showcase your area as a place to work and a place to do business. And there's no better time to do it than when an event is taking place in your community. Step 9 After you've successfully hosted the event, you want to make sure that you have consistent evaluation tools. You want to evaluate the performance of each event, and then you want to evaluate your annual performance of your sport or event tourism program. Ultimately, this is assuming that it is an outcome-based roadmap so that you're trying to deliver specific outcomes and drive specific impacts. And in order to do that, or to know if you've done that successfully, you need to be able to consistently evaluate. Most jurisdictions, they're looking to host the event successfully, to guard against any reputational or financial risk. And then if they do that, then it's a win. But ultimately, if you're able to tell your story post-event, then that will help you the next time that you go to council, you go to the residents, and to try to engage your community about the next event. And then legacy. If you've got a formal legacy program, if you are transferring knowledge from each of your events, and if you've got a sustainability program for your market, then this again will help to build future success, because you'll have something tangible that will be able to help with your next bid, your next event, and ultimately you'll be able to make better decisions. So let's talk about STAT, how it works. Phase 1 is the completion of the STAT online tool. That takes, as I mentioned, between 10 and 15 minutes. It really is very easy to complete. And then phase 2, you'll receive your score within a few days from CSTA, which will give you your score by section, as well as your cumulative score. It does not provide you with any comparisons at that stage, because it is a new tool and we haven't developed all of that data yet, or we haven't been able to mine all of that data yet. So that STAT is the free version, and that can get you started and give you a sense of where you are today. STAT Pro is following the completion of STAT. Phase 3 is to review with the CSTA consultant to validate your inputs. What I would suggest to you that every input should default to no, unless it is 100% yes. If it's 100% yes, then absolutely note it with a Y. But if it is 75% or even 90% yes, but not fully, then it would still be a no. Ultimately, what it's going to do is it's going to give you a more objective score, and especially for your first completion of STAT, it will give you a more informed baseline or starting point to build towards a more strategic approach in the future. Phase 4 is a discussion of next steps with the CSTA consultant based on your results, can help to answer any questions and give you some of the feedback. And then in phase 5 of STAT Pro, CSTA will develop a STAT report, and that STAT Pro report will give you some information that can help you in making some of your strategic decisions. This is the table of contents for a STAT Pro report. It includes an executive summary and intro, talks about the methodology for STAT, gives some of the profile of your host city, can provide some discussion around the past hosting experience of your city, and then can really delve into some of the findings that are mined out of the inputs that you provided into the tool. And then the appendices is where there is some really valuable information, including the data sets by question. So that will give you all of your data by each question, and can identify for the reader where some opportunities are for development of new tools, new information, new policies, new strategies, and the like. It will also provide you with a 12-phase quarterly action plan, which I'll talk about in a moment, as well as the Global Sports Impact GSI Canada Index report.
Grant, I'm going to just jump in right now. If you could go back to the the preceding slide there.
Sure.
Just a couple of quick questions from the group. The one thing I would say is I did not expect this, but in the poll, we had 71% of participants here say that they don't have an existing and current sport tourism or event attraction hosting strategy. So some of the questions that they've asked here is starting with the stat tool at stage one, is that a good first step towards moving towards sort of a more formalized strategy?
Yes, and as I said earlier, consider it step 0 of your strategy process. What it can also do is it can tell you that maybe now is not the right time for you to undertake a strategy project. Maybe you need to develop some policy or some of those other elements, especially in step 1 at that foundational level, before you embark upon the development of a strategy. That is really the opportunity here. Is we want to make sure that jurisdictions don't automatically undertake strategy projects, because there might be some other elements that they can do in the meantime that might get them to a better state of readiness to undertake that strategy project.
Okay. Another question that came in here was the Stat Pro report looks to have a really good format to it. Give us some examples of who that report would be best used to give to within your local stakeholders.
That is going to inform, and it will depend upon what organization, sport, tourism, or event hosting resides. If it, I would say it's a good internal tool that can help you to inform and educate colleagues within your organization. So if somebody else is in marketing or communications, or somebody else is in on the policy side of the organization, this can give them a good foundational perspective on sport, tourism, or event hosting. It can also, external to the organization, can serve as an educational tool for you with your councils, with some corporate partners, with some facility operators, with your accommodation sector, and it can really help to engage and maybe serve as a starting point for some more in-depth discussion about how your jurisdiction can do better in the attraction of the right events and the successful hosting of all events.
Awesome. And one final question before we get back on track here, just because it's a good question, but it puts you on the spot a bit. So when you were talking about how you're going through inputting using stat, and if you're not 100%, if you're 70 or you're 90, then don't be to put a yes. You should put a no whenever you're filling out that information. Can you give us an example of something where you're seeing yourself as a 70 or 90 and not a 100%?
Yes, I can. So something that is yes or no is, do you have an international airport within 50 kilometers? So that's clearly a yes or no. But there might be some other areas. One question under step 4, partnerships, ambassador program. Do you have a formalized ambassador program for airport, taxi, hotel, restaurant, retail, your local experiences or attractions? Well, you may have something that's informal, and you may have something that you can mobilize on a reactive basis. But if you don't have a proactive strategic approach or formalized ambassador program where all of those groups are aware of all of the events that are taking place and are able to staff accordingly, get their inventory in accordingly, and are able to speak about the event and animate the experience for the visitor, then I would say that that would be one where there would be shades of gray, where a 90% would still be a no.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, the 12-phase quarterly action plan. So in Stat Pro, one of the things that we want to do is to build out by quarter over a 3-year term some of those areas where the jurisdiction can identify that low-hanging fruit and can capitalize on the opportunities that come out of the stat inputs that you provided. So it could be something as simple as ensuring alignment of the sport tourism strategy with the recreation facility master plan. But maybe the recreation facility master plan is happening in year 2. Well, that's something that would be identified in quarters 5 through 8. So that is a collaborative process. It's not simply throwing darts at a dartboard. That would ensure that the timing that is identified for each of these potential actions aligns with those that fit within the business cycles for your organization. So it's not done completely in isolation. It is collaborative to ensure that it can fit with where your organization is going and where your organization is looking to take its sport tourism or event hosting program. So Stat Pro and GSI, which was also launched at Congress this year in Halifax. So just a quick comparison. Stat Pro provides the opportunity to assess your evolution as a sport tourism host market and identifies areas of potential improvement. GSI provides you with a very data-driven Canada City ranking and Canada Sport ranking. That is done using the same methodology as is used for the global sport hosting index, which Canada has consistently ranked in the top 10 of. So very analytical. Stat Pro is a little bit more grassroots. And GSI, because it is included with a Stat Pro report, provides you with city analysis, sport analysis within your city, the event calendar, GSI Canada indexes, some case studies, and contextual narrative. So where most strategy projects involve a jurisdictional review or a competitive landscape scan, this provides you with an opportunity for some consistent measures in comparing Canadian cities against one another. And the comparisons for GSI are based on population. So it's not trying to compare a small center with some of the larger centers in Canada, because we want to make sure that it is relevant and applicable to your market. Now, at this point, Stephen has another poll question.
That's right. And the question is, how many of you completed the Canada Sport Impact GSI survey in 2017? So we're going to launch that right now. You'll have a chance to answer that. So we've got 70% of the vote has come in. We'll hold on for a little bit longer. And I'm about to close the polls here, but just to summarize for you, Grant, I know you might not be able to see it as a presenter. 13% said yes, they completed it. 75% said no. 13% said they were not sure. There you go.
Okay.
So maybe the best thing to do, Grant, would be if we could explain to them why GSI might be something for them to be interested in terms of completing in future years or being interested. What is the call to action for municipalities or destinations of all sizes to want to do it?
GSI will give you that objective view of where your destination stacks up against others in Canada from a hosting perspective, because it is very objective and analytical. It is not about how well you do something, it's about how much you've done of something. So, and it does have both a forward, so what have you bid on, what are you scheduled to host, and also a rear view of what have you hosted in the past. And through that, it can generate some rankings within each of the population categories. So I would highly recommend that that everybody complete it. It does take a little bit of time. It will come out at the end of the calendar year or the start of next year. So we'll give you some time to reflect and ensure that it is completed accurately, but it can give you that comparison where you're looking at an apple versus an apple in comparing your market to another one of like size. Okay, so how often? We recommend that STAT can be done every year, and that is the free version. STAT Pro, that is getting the report generated. We recommend that it every 3 years would give you a good strategic cycle in which to look back, but also look forward on what are some of the opportunities or action planning that could be developed for the next 3 years. So we think that that fits into a very reasonable strategic cycle. And then for GSI, we're recommending that it could be completed each year and is included as part of the CSTA annual report. So as many of you know, the results from this year's GSI Canada Index were released at Congress, and similarly next year they will be released at Congress in Ottawa in 2019. So the cost, quick overview for STAT. The online survey is free of charge. And then for STAT Pro, which is the basic service that provides you with the information as we've outlined, that is $5,000 plus applicable taxes. And it has been developed at that price point in order to try to fit in with most municipal procurement thresholds, because over 5,000, we recognize that many jurisdictions will require a formal RFP process. GSI, the annual overall ranking, again, is free of charge. And then the full report is free with STAT Pro. If you were to purchase that as a standalone item, the cost for that would be $1,350 Canadian. So STAT Pro Enhanced, there are some additional add-on opportunities with STAT Pro, and those can include CSTA consulting support, helping you to implement on some of the action plans that have been identified, and in some cases it can be mentoring for your jurisdiction, especially if you are new to sport tourism, and perhaps there might be more in-depth education and awareness building that is required, not just within the organization, but it could be within your municipal councils and with some of your partners and stakeholder groups. That cost will depend on the level of service. So how to get started? In the PDF document that you can download from this session, there will be a link there. STAT is available in both English and French. There are 2 different links, and the information, as I mentioned, once you complete it, it will be sent to CSTA, and within a couple of days, you will receive a worksheet back that will provide you with your scoring by section, as well as your cumulative score. With that, I would open it up for any questions. My contact information is listed there, as is Eric Savard's. And if you have any questions about STAT, don't hesitate to get in touch. And I thank you very much for your time and welcome any further questions.
Awesome. Well, I encourage people to send in their last minute questions here. I do have one more question for you, Grant. Grant, this is based on your background and experience, having gone into destinations of different sizes and helped reshape the way that they do their business or have an event hosting strategy and practice. Can you share maybe some of your experience working in Nova Scotia or in Alberta, and the idea of what it's like to start sort of from the ground up and how to work into something more formalized and make it more efficient?
Sure. Well, I've had the opportunity to work on sport tourism strategies in 5 provinces in Canada. And those strategies ranged from very small markets to some major centers in Canada. And with each of those, there are different problems, but also different opportunities that exist within the local market. Some of those might be political, some of those might be traditional in that a community has done things a certain way for a very long time. So in some cases, it could be bad elements have become habitual. So what I would suggest to everybody is that regardless of your jurisdiction, how big you are, what your facility assets are, what your community sport organization capacity looks like, there is an opportunity to improve. And I would recommend that STAT provides you with that objective and industry standard view that can give you the opportunity to reflect on how you are doing things and to identify areas that you might be able to improve upon, or maybe even innovate and go in different directions. Sport tourism has evolved a lot in the last 20 years. And communities in this country have been hosting events as long as there have been communities in this country. And but it's only the last 20 years that we've really formalized as an industry sector. There is a lot of work to do, and I would just suggest that each jurisdiction needs to keep learning, needs to continually seek opportunities to improve how they do things, and to look at different ways of doing things, not just for the sake of it, but to examine the chance to develop new business, to drive new impacts, or even to explore previously unthought of areas. So who would have thought that in 5 years ago that esports would have been an area of opportunity? Well, it is, and we need to be able to react to it, because ultimately at some point a promoter will come knocking on our door and will say, have we got an event for you? And then we need to be able to respond to that, and be able to provide good advice and counsel to those that are making decisions in our areas.
One final question here. You talked about how far the sport tourism sector has moved in the last 20 years, and there's absolutely no disagreeing that. Even just total output, even in the last couple of years, it's been incredible. How is Stat Pro, and the GSI Index hopefully going to help move the sector forward in the next couple of years?
The intent is that it will reduce some strategy projects that might be premature or may not be necessary at the current time. Ultimately, what we at CSTA have talked about is not creating strategies that sit on shelves, because there are plenty of them across this country. And ultimately, because things change, elections happen every 4 years, people change positions, new facilities are built, existing facilities are aging all the time. It's constant evolution. So I would suggest that that people need to be embracing that change, and seeing how we can strategically take sport tourism in new and innovative directions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Grant, and thank you to the group for your participation. Just as a wrap up here, I want to thank our speaker yet again. He did a great job, Grant, overseeing this new and exciting tool and talking about the GSI index. For those participants, I hope you enjoyed it. I want to remind you that a copy of this webinar, a video recording of this webinar, will be made available to you along with a resubmitting of the handout. You can download the PDF here yourself, or I will send it as a follow-up. You may be prompted to provide some feedback at the end of the webinar about the webinar. Please take the time to answer the questions about the webinar, as it helps us to improve this series of webinars. And in terms of schedule for our future webinars, our next webinar is next week. It's a Curling Canada Events Showcase. It's a must-attend for cities who want to bid for Curling Canada events. Who doesn't? And for those sports that are looking to model their bidding processes with one of the best-run sport organizations in Canada, we have discounts for members to take part in these webinars, and you're able to access the video afterwards if you attend. We have great rates for our sport members, so please pass on the word and make sure that we have good attendance for these upcoming ones, especially Curling Canada. It's a don't miss. So if you have any ideas about topics you'd like to attend in the fall, or if you'd like to talk about sponsorship or anything else related to the webinars, please feel free to contact me. Without further ado, thanks, Grant. Thanks to all the participants, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.